Chapter 1. The Unlikely Pairing. The shuttle was nothing more than a hulking, aging piece of machinery, struggling to stay functional as it drifted through the inky blackness of space. Its hull groaned under the strain, and the faint buzzing of a failing engine resonated through the walls, adding to the already palpable tension within. Inside the dimly lit cabin, the atmosphere was thick, laden with a kind of unspoken dread, a feeling that neither of the two passengers could shake off. Each of them sat, alone with their thoughts, bound by chains, unable to escape the grim fate that awaited them on the desolate world ahead. The stars outside the viewport flickered in the distance, but it was hard for them to take comfort in their distant light, for the future they both faced was as bleak as the black void that stretched infinitely before them. Kalen stared out the viewport, his weary eyes scanning the endless sea of stars, but there was no solace to be found in their cold, distant glow. His thoughts were jumbled, the fragments of his mind piecing together the memory of the events that led to this moment, to his present predicament. He had once been a soldier, part of the elite security forces that protected the colonies on the outer edges of the galaxy. He had served for years with dedication and discipline, believing in the righteousness of his cause. But now, here he was, shackled and condemned, facing what could only be described as a death sentence, abandoned on a planet that was so far beyond hostile that even the hardest of criminals were terrified to be sent there. He had no idea why they had chosen him for this punishment, nor why they had chosen Lyra to accompany him. She, like him, was bound by chains, but unlike him, she had a strange aura about her, calm, collected, and composed, as though she were used to enduring hardships, as though she had been here before, in this very place. Her sharp green eyes occasionally flickered toward him, but she didn't speak, her lips tight, her expression unreadable. Kalen had tried to engage with her at first, to make sense of why she was here, but she had been tight-lipped and cold, unwilling to share anything that might explain her presence. From the very first moment they had been brought together in the holding cells, chained like animals, Kalen had instinctively known that there was more to her than met the eye. Her demeanor suggested she was no ordinary prisoner. She was far too composed, too poised. Even when the guards had come to transport them, she had looked at them with a level of calm disdain, as if she were merely going through the motions of an inconvenience rather than a punishment. For someone in her position, that kind of composure was rare. Kalen had been unsettled by it, but there was no time to dwell on his observations. His own mind was too busy processing the gravity of his situation, his thoughts turning inward as the shuttle sped toward the planet that would be his final destination. Lyra shifted slightly, her chains clinking softly, a noise that was both mundane and ominous in the silence of the shuttle. Her gaze never faltered from the opposite wall, her posture rigid as if she were in some sort of meditative trance, as if somehow she could block out the reality of what was happening. Kalen's chains rattled slightly as he shifted to get more comfortable, but there was no real comfort to be had here. The shuttle's seating arrangements were designed for practicality, not comfort. The hard, cold metal of the seats dug into his back, and despite the ship's aging technology, the air was still stifling, making it difficult to breathe. Their journey had begun hours ago, but the time had stretched on endlessly in the confined space of the shuttle. He knew that the planet they were headed to was nothing but a lifeless rock, one that had been abandoned years ago after an incident that had rendered it uninhabitable for any form of life. Yet, here they were, prisoners, being dropped onto that same desolate land. The reason for their exile was a mystery to him. He had been accused of treason, of betraying his own people. He didn't know whether the charges were true or not. In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had been sentenced to die, to survive or not on a planet that would slowly kill him. The air was toxic, the terrain treacherous, and the resources non-existent. It was a planet where even the hardiest of life forms struggled to survive. The kind of place you sent someone when you wanted them to disappear. Kalen glanced over at Lyra again, but this time, she caught his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, like an animal sizing up its opponent, yet there was no malice in her stare, only curiosity. She didn't speak, but the briefest flicker of acknowledgement passed between them. It was clear that she wasn't here by accident. She had a purpose, a reason for being chosen to share this punishment with him. But what was it? Kalen opened his mouth to ask, but before he could get the words out, Lyra beat him to it. You think you're here for punishment, don't you? Her voice was soft, almost too soft to be heard over the hum of the shuttle's engine, but it cut through the air like a knife. But you're wrong. Kalen furrowed his brow, confused. What do you mean? Lyra's eyes glinted in the dim light of the shuttle as she leaned forward slightly, her chains shifting with the movement. This isn't a punishment, Kalen. This is a test. A test for you and for me. He didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed silent, waiting for her to explain further. The test? What was she talking about? A test for what? His mind was racing, but he couldn't form the question he wanted to ask. Lyra, noticing his confusion, continued. They think we're being exiled because we're criminals, she said, her voice calm, but with an edge of something dark, something Kalen couldn't quite place. But the truth is far more complicated than that. This planet, this place, it's not just an exile. It's a proving ground. A place where the strong survive and the weak are left to die. We're being watched, Kalen. Every move we make is being tracked. They're testing us to see if we're worthy. Kalen's heart began to beat faster. His thoughts became jumbled as her words sank in. This wasn't just about punishment. This was something bigger, something far more sinister. They were pawns in a game he didn't understand, and the only thing they had in common was the chains that bound them together. How could he not have seen it before? They had been selected for something, chosen for something, yet they had been told nothing of what that something was. And if we survive? Kalen asked, his voice barely a whisper. What then? Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, as if she were considering how much to reveal. Then we prove we're worthy, she said, her eyes locking with his. We prove we can survive on a planet that has killed everyone else who's ever been sent here. We show them that we have the strength to make it. The shuttle lurched suddenly, throwing both of them forward against their chains. Kalen grunted in surprise, trying to brace himself against the force. Lyra's expression remained unreadable, though her grip on the armrests tightened. There was no sign of panic in her, only the same steady resolve. Get ready, she said, her voice steady. We're almost there. The shuttle continued its descent, the hum of the engines growing louder as the planet's atmosphere enveloped them. Kalen's heart hammered in his chest as the shuttle broke through the clouds, the barren landscape below coming into view. It was exactly as they had described, an endless stretch of rocky terrain, cracked and dry, with no vegetation in sight. No sign of life, just the barren emptiness of a world that had been abandoned long ago. And yet, as the shuttle began its final descent, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a prison. This was something else. A place where survival wasn't just about living, it was about proving something greater, something hidden in the heart of this hostile world. As the shuttle touched down with a soft thud, the hatch began to open. The cold air hit them like a slap in the face, thin, suffocating, toxic. They both stood, the chains between them clinking as they moved, and stepped toward the exit, their legs unsteady as they prepared to face the nightmare that lay ahead. Kalen didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know what test he was being asked to pass or what survival on this planet would truly require. But one thing was certain, he wasn't here to die. Not yet. As they stepped into the harsh, unforgiving light of the planet's surface, Kalen exchanged a final glance with Lyra. Whatever came next, they would have to face it together. They had no choice but to survive. And survive they would. As Kalen and Lyra stepped into the light, the full weight of their situation hit them with brutal clarity. The planet they now stood upon was a barren wasteland, its horizon stretching out in every direction like a sea of endless gray. The ground beneath their boots was cracked, as if it had been scorched by fires long since died out, and the air was thin, cold, and filled with a faint metallic taste that made every breath feel like a labor. The atmosphere here was not breathable for long. Every second they spent outside without proper filtration was a risk, and yet, here they were, forced to confront the reality that this was now their home. The shuttle, a sleek but aged craft, remained in the background, its hatch open and its engines quietly hissing as they powered down. The interior was still warm, a sharp contrast to the harsh outside air, and for a moment, Kalen considered returning to its relative safety. But as his eyes scanned the barren land, he realized that they had no choice. The only way forward was into the desolation. Lyra stepped ahead, the chains between them clinking softly with each movement, but she didn't seem bothered by the sound. Her posture remained unwavering, her gaze steady as she surveyed their surroundings. Kaylin felt a pang of irritation, a jealousy of her cool composure. How could she be so calm? They were on a planet where nothing survived, where the sun blazed relentlessly through a sky devoid of clouds, and where even the very rocks seemed to resist life itself. The ground was littered with jagged stones, sharp enough to tear through skin, and the air was harsh on their lungs. There was no shade here, no water, nothing to offer comfort. And yet, Lyra walked forward without hesitation. "Keep moving," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing in its steadiness. "The longer we wait, the harder it will get." Kaylin gritted his teeth, his temper flaring at her controlled demeanor. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he followed her as she began walking toward the farthest point on the horizon, where the ruins of a long-abandoned outpost barely visible against the dark expanse of the land. The outpost, or what was left of it, was a former research facility designed to study the planet's hostile environment, a place where explorers had once been sent to see how life could survive here. No one had returned from the mission. The outpost had long been abandoned, and its purpose was forgotten, reduced to little more than a crumbling relic of human ambition. It was the last place Kaylin wanted to go, but it was the only place they could go. As they walked, the chains between them clinked with every step, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence that surrounded them. The more they walked, the more the reality of their situation settled in. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a death sentence. They were being tested, as Lyra had said, but the kind of test that didn't have a clear end or a defined victory. The trial they were to endure was not only one of survival, but of endurance, resilience, and spirit. The problem wasn't just the hostile environment, it was the uncertainty, the unknown. What awaited them beyond the outpost? How would they survive this barren world, where everything was designed to kill them slowly? Lyra turned to look at him briefly, her eyes cold but calculating. She was analyzing him, as she had since they had been paired together. She saw him as a puzzle to be solved, a mystery that she had yet to unravel. The fact that they had been chained together for this journey felt more like a challenge to her than a punishment. It was a test of their ability to work together, to survive as one, whether they liked it or not. Kaylin had no intention of letting her think for 1 second that he would simply follow her orders. His pride, despite his fragile body, burned brightly. "So, tell me," he finally spoke, his voice low and filled with both curiosity and frustration. "Why did they pair us together? Are you just another convict like me? Or is there something else I don't know about you?" Lyra stopped, her green eyes locking onto his with a piercing intensity. She didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of discomfort at the question. "You think you're here by accident, don't you?" she asked, her voice measured but sharp. "You think they just dropped us off here to die because we've crossed some line?" Kaylin frowned. He hadn't thought much about her specific circumstances, but her question made him pause. "What do you mean?" "They didn't send us here because we're criminals," she continued, her voice quiet but certain. "We've been chosen because we are part of something larger. A mission. A test that no one else could survive. They put us here because we can endure. Because we can make it through what they think is impossible." Kaylin stared at her, disbelief spreading through him. "Endure? Impossible? What the hell are you talking about?" She turned her gaze back to the horizon. "We weren't meant to die here, Kaylin. At least, not like you think. This planet, this wasteland, is not an execution ground. It's a proving ground." Kaylin took a deep breath, trying to make sense of her words. She was calm, but there was something unsettling about her certainty. The puzzle of her character deepened. "So, if not punishment, then what? Some kind of test for what?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She walked for a few steps more before speaking again. "I'm here because I was chosen to test the limits of human endurance. To see if humanity could survive in the most hostile environments in the galaxy. They think you and I can make it through this. And if we do, then perhaps they can use us as a model, as an example for something much larger." Kaylin's heart thudded in his chest as he processed her words. This was no ordinary exile. They weren't abandoned for their mistakes. They were abandoned because their very survival would be a measure of human potential. He couldn't believe it. He wasn't just a prisoner. He wasn't just someone left to die. He was part of an experiment, a living lab rat thrown into the harshest environment possible. And Lyra, this woman who barely spoke, who didn't seem human at times, was his partner in this twisted trial. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Kalen asked, his voice rising with frustration. Why keep something like this a secret? Lyra stopped and turned to face him. Her expression softened, just slightly, but there was no warmth in it. You didn't need to know until now. But now you do. And you're stuck with me. And this planet. Her eyes locked with his. Survive, Kalen. That's all that matters. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the distant rumble of the planet's shifting crust. The weight of her words pressed on Kalen, heavier than the chains that bound them together. She was right in one sense, he was stuck. They both were. And despite his anger and confusion, he could feel something else stirring inside him. The faintest flicker of determination. If this was a test, then it wasn't just for survival. It was for something more. I'm not just going to sit here and wait to die, Kalen muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing in resolve. Lyra's lips quirked slightly, a faint but genuine smile flickering for the briefest of moments. Then, let's see what you're made of. Chapter 2. The test begins. The sun overhead beat down mercilessly, casting long, deep shadows across the jagged landscape. There was no shelter here, no refuge from the planet's harsh environment. The air, thin and toxic, stung with each breath, and every movement felt like an effort. Kalen stumbled slightly as he walked, his chains clinking as they shifted with his body. His legs were sore from the unaccustomed weight of the chains, and he could already feel his skin cracking from the dryness of the air. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Not with Lyra leading the way, seemingly unbothered by the conditions, moving forward with the kind of steady resolve that Kalen both envied and resented. They reached the ruins of the outpost before nightfall. The station, a crumbling edifice of metal and stone, was all that remained of a once proud effort to study the planet. It was half buried in sand and ash, its walls blackened by years of exposure to the harsh solar flares that had made the planet uninhabitable for most species. The outpost looked like a relic from a forgotten time, and yet it was still standing, still holding on to whatever life had once existed there. Inside, the place was eerily silent. The air was stale, and the smell of decay hung heavy in the stagnant atmosphere. Kalen's heart raced as he stepped into the building, his eyes scanning every corner of the room for signs of life or signs of danger. He had been expecting to find nothing but ruins. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. The walls of the outpost were covered in strange, alien markings, some of which Kalen had never seen before. They were etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the dark. This wasn't just an old human outpost. This was something else, something far more mysterious. Lyra, too, seemed to sense it. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the markings with a mixture of curiosity and caution. It's not just the atmosphere that's been altered here, she murmured, more to herself than to Kalen. This place, it's not just abandoned. It's been changed. Kalen turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. Changed? By what? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to one of the symbols on the wall, reaching out to touch it. As her fingers brushed the surface, the symbol began to glow more brightly, and the entire room seemed to pulse with a strange energy. This place, she said slowly, her voice tinged with something almost reverent, isn't just a test for survival. It's a test for something far older, something far more dangerous. Kalen could only watch as Lyra traced the symbols, each touch sending waves of light across the walls. There was no turning back now. The test had truly begun, and whatever awaited them here, they would face it together. Kalen's mind raced as he took in the strange scene before him. The symbols on the walls of the outpost, their ethereal glow pulsing with each movement of Lyra's hand, were nothing like anything he had seen before. They were ancient, possibly alien in origin, and their appearance here, on this hostile planet, felt like more than a coincidence. The more he stared at them, the more it became apparent that they were not simply decorative. They were deliberate, etched with purpose, and designed to withstand time and decay. This wasn't just an abandoned research facility. This was something else entirely. Something deeper. Something older. And the idea that it had been waiting for them, or perhaps, that they had been waiting for it, made Kalen's stomach tighten with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Lyra, though, seemed undeterred. She had her eyes locked on the symbols, her fingers dancing across their surface, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was no hesitation in her movements, no fear. She was entranced, as if the very energy of the place called to her. Kalen, for his part, felt nothing but unease. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about this place, this planet, that made his skin crawl. The air felt charged, heavy with an invisible weight. It was as if the planet itself was aware of their presence, watching them, testing them in ways they couldn't understand. "Lyra, what's going on here?" Kalen asked, his voice low but laced with urgency. He couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of his stomach any longer. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes narrowing slightly, but her expression remained calm. "This place is more than a ruin. These symbols, they're not just language. They're a map, a guide to something hidden, something buried beneath the surface of this planet." Kalen took a cautious step forward, his chains clinking loudly in the silence. A map? To what? Lyra's gaze flickered to the floor beneath them, where the dust was thick, obscuring whatever might lie beneath. "To whatever secret the planet is holding," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We weren't just abandoned here to survive. We were brought here for a reason, and that reason is tied to these symbols." Kalen stood still, absorbing her words. The weight of her statement hung in the air, and as much as he wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of someone trying to make sense of their impossible situation, something deep inside him told him it was more than just that. He had felt the pulse of something otherworldly in the air ever since they arrived. The planet didn't just feel empty, it felt alive, as if it were waiting for them, waiting for something to happen. And now, with Lyra's revelation, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were part of something far bigger than themselves. "Do you think we're supposed to find it?" Kalen asked cautiously, his eyes flickering to the faint glow emanating from the symbols. Lyra nodded, her expression intense. "I think we have no choice but to try." Kalen's stomach twisted. There was no going back now. The decision had already been made. Whatever this planet was hiding, whatever secret it held beneath its surface, it was now their task to uncover it. Whether they liked it or not, they had become part of something far beyond the scope of survival. It wasn't just about staying alive anymore. It was about discovering the truth of why they had been brought here, to this forsaken world. And the more Kalen thought about it, the more he realized that their survival might depend on it. "We need to figure out where these symbols lead," Kalen said, determination creeping into his voice. "But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Lyra gave him a look of acknowledgement, but there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. "I agree, but we can't survive if we don't understand what we're up against." Without another word, they both turned their attention to the symbols. Lyra moved closer to the wall, her hands now tracing the shapes more deliberately. The light from the symbols seemed to grow brighter as she touched them, pulsating in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. Kalen watched her carefully, noticing the way she seemed to instinctively understand what was happening. She wasn't just touching the symbols, she was connecting with them, unlocking something deep within their structure. The room around them began to shift. The air grew colder, and Kalen's breath came out in visible puffs. The ground beneath their feet vibrated ever so slightly, as if something ancient was stirring beneath them, waking from a long slumber. Lyra's hands faltered for a moment, and Kalen noticed the way her body tensed, as if she were bracing herself for something. Then, with a sudden, sharp click, a panel in the floor opened with a hiss, revealing a dark stairway leading downward into the depths of the planet. The air grew even colder, and Kalen felt a sudden chill that ran down his spine, his skin prickling with unease. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from the symbols above, as if the depths were demanding secrecy, demanding silence. Lyra didn't hesitate. Without a word, she began to descend into the darkness, her chains dragging softly behind her. Kalen, after a moment's hesitation, followed. There was no other choice. The unknown awaited them, and their survival depended on finding whatever secret the planet had hidden for so long. Chapter 3: The Depths Beneath. The stairway descended into a cold, damp underground chamber, its air thick with the scent of decay and age. The walls were lined with ancient, jagged rock, interspersed with strange, metallic filaments that seemed to pulse with faint energy. The deeper they went, the more the air felt alive, charged with an energy that Kalen could feel in his bones. It was as if the very ground beneath them was humming, resonating with a frequency that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. There was something ancient here, something that had been waiting for them. At the bottom of the stairwell, the chamber opened up into a vast cavern, its size impossible to determine in the dim light. The floor was uneven, cracked in places, with pools of stagnant water scattered across its surface. Yet what drew Kalen's eyes was the central structure of the cavern, an enormous, circular platform that seemed to rise from the depths of the cavern floor. It was surrounded by what looked like ancient carvings, similar to the symbols they had seen above ground. But these carvings were much larger, much more intricate, and they seemed to radiate an energy that Kalen could feel in his chest. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the platform. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we were meant to find." Kalen's heart pounded in his chest as he moved closer to the platform. He could feel the weight of the air pressing against him, as though the cavern itself were aware of their presence. The symbols on the walls of the cavern seemed to shift with the flickering of the light, rearranging themselves as if alive. The carvings seemed to pulse, almost as if they were calling to something deep within the planet. A low hum resonated in the air, and Kalen could feel it in his bones. It was a sound unlike any he had ever heard, a sound that filled the space around them, as if the planet itself was awakening. "Do you hear that?" Kalen whispered, his voice almost drowned out by the resonance. Lyra nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the platform. "It's the energy," she said. "It's like a beacon. The planet is resonating with something buried deep beneath the surface." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and a sharp, piercing noise filled the air, like the sound of metal grinding against metal. The platform before them began to shift, and slowly, a section of it rose, revealing a hidden chamber beneath. The air grew colder still, and the faint light from the symbols above flickered as the cavern seemed to pulse in response to whatever was happening below. Without a word, Lyra moved toward the opening, her chains dragging behind her as she stepped forward into the newly revealed chamber. Kalen followed, the heavy weight of his chains making each step feel like a burden. The deeper they went into the unknown, the more it felt as though they were uncovering something that had been hidden from the galaxy for eons. Something dangerous, something powerful. As they descended further, the walls of the chamber seemed to narrow, and the space grew darker. But there was a faint light ahead, a glow, pulsing steadily in the distance. Kalen's heart raced as they moved closer to it, the sense of foreboding growing with each step. When they finally reached the source of the light, they found themselves standing before a massive, ancient door, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols that had guided them this far. The door itself seemed to be made of some unknown material, smooth and reflective, but it was unlike anything Kalen had ever seen. It thrummed with power, its surface vibrating in a way that sent a ripple of energy through the air. "This is it," Lyra breathed, her voice filled with reverence. "This is the source. This is what the test has been leading to." Kalen stared at the door, his pulse quickening. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay beyond this door, whatever the test was, they were about to face it. Together, with a slow, deliberate movement, Lyra reached out and placed her hand against the door. The light from the symbols intensified, bathing them both in an eerie glow. The door hummed, and then, with a deep, resonating sound, it slowly began to open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The secrets of the planet were about to be unveiled, and Kalen realized, with a chill creeping down his spine, that what lay ahead could change everything. As the massive door began to open, a low, almost imperceptible vibration hummed through the ground beneath their feet. Kalen could feel it in his bones, the pressure of ancient forces stirring to life, responding to their presence. The chamber beyond was dark, the glow from the symbols above casting only faint shadows in the enormous space. As the door creaked open wider, a strange wind, thick with the scent of ancient dust, rushed toward them, carrying with it an odd, almost metallic odor that sent a shiver down Kalen's spine. Lyra stepped forward without hesitation, her chains clinking softly as she moved into the unknown. Her eyes, glowing with a strange intensity in the dim light, were fixed ahead, as if she could sense something that Kalen could not. He followed her closely, his heart pounding in his chest. The air seemed to grow thicker with every step, heavy with something intangible but all-encompassing. The floor beneath them was smooth, made of the same strange material that the door was composed of, and it appeared to stretch endlessly in all directions. The chamber they entered was vast, far larger than any space station Kalen had ever been inside. The ceiling was impossibly high, its arch stretching far beyond what the human eye could discern, disappearing into the inky blackness above. The walls were lined with more symbols, larger than those outside, their intricate designs glowing with an eerie, ethereal light. But the most striking feature of the room was at its center, a massive structure, towering and imposing, surrounded by faintly pulsating energy fields. It was an enormous stone obelisk, at least 10 times the height of a man, and it seemed to hum with power, as if alive. Lyra walked toward the obelisk with an almost reverent expression. Kalen could feel his pulse quicken as he followed her, something pulling at him, something deeper than curiosity. It was as if the obelisk itself were calling to him, urging him to come closer, to unlock whatever secrets it held. He fought the urge to step forward too quickly, but it was as if the force of the chamber itself was compelling him to move. When Lyra reached the obelisk, she stopped, her hands trembling slightly as she raised them toward the stone surface. She paused for a moment, as though listening to something only she could hear. Then, without any further warning, she placed her palms against the obelisk. The moment her skin made contact with the stone, a surge of energy shot through the room, and Kalen staggered back, instinctively raising his arms to shield his face. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the obelisk, flooding the room with an intensity that took Kalen's breath away. The ground beneath them vibrated violently, and the air seemed to crackle with energy, like a storm about to break. Kalen's vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though the world itself were disintegrating around him. He stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him, but Lyra remained standing, unyielding, her eyes closed as she absorbed the overwhelming power that surged from the obelisk. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed, and the vibrating ceased. Kalen blinked rapidly, trying to regain his bearings. The room was silent once more, but the atmosphere had changed. The oppressive weight that had filled the air before was gone, replaced with a strange sense of stillness, as though the chamber had settled into a new equilibrium. Lyra slowly withdrew her hands from the obelisk, her face expressionless, but her eyes now glowing brighter than ever. Kalen took a cautious step forward, his voice trembling slightly. What just happened? Lyra turned toward him, her gaze heavy and focused. This is it, Kalen. The test is over. Kalen's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? The test? We've been sent here to survive, to endure. We've made it this far. I don't understand. Lyra's lips curved slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. We weren't just sent here to survive. We were sent here to awaken what was buried. To prove that we could endure not just the physical trials, but the trials of the mind, the soul. This planet, this place, is more than just a punishment. It's a transformation. The obelisk is not just a relic. It's a gateway, Kalen. A gateway to what? Power, Lyra whispered, her voice low, almost reverent. Power that has been sealed away for centuries. Power that will change everything. Kalen looked at her, his mind racing. You knew this all along, didn't you? Lyra met his gaze and nodded. I've always known there was more to this planet. The moment we arrived, I could feel it. The planet is alive, Kalen. It's not just a place of desolation. It's a place of rebirth, and we were chosen to unlock it. Together, Kalen felt a strange shiver run down his spine, a mixture of awe and fear. And now that we've unlocked it, Lyra stepped back, her gaze still fixed on the obelisk. Now we must decide. We were chosen for a reason, Kalen. But what happens next is up to us. Before Kalen could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again. This time, it wasn't just a subtle vibration, it was a violent quake, shaking the very walls of the chamber. The obelisk's glow intensified, sending waves of energy crashing through the room. Kalen could feel the power surging through him, through the air, through everything. The entire planet seemed to be coming alive, reacting to whatever it was they had unlocked. We have to get out of here, Kalen shouted, but his voice barely carried above the roar of the shaking room. Lyra didn't move. She was standing still, as though the chaos around her meant nothing. Her expression was serene, even as the cavern began to collapse around them. "Not yet," Lyra replied softly. "We've only just begun." Suddenly, a massive crack split the floor beneath their feet. Kalen yelped as he jumped backward, narrowly avoiding the chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. He glanced around frantically, his heart racing. There was no time left. Whatever was happening, it was escalating fast, and they had to move. But Lyra wasn't running. She was still standing, watching as the cavern seemed to collapse into the abyss. Her eyes were alight with something Kalen couldn't comprehend, something deeper than fear, something almost triumphant. "This planet is not going to kill us," Lyra said, her voice steady as the walls cracked. "It is going to change us." Kalen could only watch as Lyra stepped forward, her chains rattling with every step. The light from the obelisk enveloped her, and for a moment, it seemed as if the very planet itself was bending to her will. The walls continued to tremble, but Lyra stood firm, unyielding. Kalen's confusion turned to realization as he watched her embrace the chaos, as though she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The chamber collapsed entirely, but as the dust cleared and the light from the obelisk dimmed, Kalen realized that the test was not about survival in the traditional sense. It was about transformation, about becoming something more, something that transcended the limitations of the body, of the planet, and perhaps even of time itself. And as the ground beneath them began to stabilize, the ruins of the outpost began to change, reforming themselves into something new. The power from the obelisk had shifted the very fabric of the planet, reshaping it into something that was no longer hostile but alive, breathing, growing. Lyra's voice, filled with quiet triumph, echoed in the silence. "It's done. The planet is awakening, and we are no longer its prisoners." Kalen looked around, his mind reeling as he absorbed the enormity of what had just transpired. This was no longer about surviving on a hostile planet. They had become part of something far larger, something that had the potential to reshape everything. And as the world shifted around them, Kalen realized that the planet's test had only just begun. Chapter 4: The Awakening. The dust settled around them, and as Kalen slowly stood, he could feel the weight of the chains still binding him to Lyra. But there was no panic in her eyes now, no uncertainty. She had seen the vision of what was to come, the next stage of this transformation, and it was something that Kalen hadn't fully grasped yet. But the more he looked at her, the more he realized that they had both crossed a threshold. They were no longer mere survivors. They were something more, something forged in the fires of this planet's trials. The land had shifted beneath them, the remnants of the ruined outpost now being replaced with lush greenery and vibrant life. It was as though the planet had awakened from a long, dormant slumber, and the earth was breathing again. The sun above, once a constant, harsh presence, now cast a warm, golden light over the landscape, no longer a threat but a nurturing force. The air had cleared, the toxins now gone, replaced with fresh, breathable oxygen. It felt like a new world, reborn. "We did it," Kalen breathed, almost in disbelief. Lyra nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "We didn't just survive. We transformed it. We transformed ourselves." The chains between them, once a symbol of punishment and restraint, now felt less significant. Kalen could feel his own strength returning, stronger than it had ever been before. They had been tested and reshaped by the very planet they had thought would be their tomb. But in the end, it had been their salvation. They had learned not just to survive, but to evolve. And as the world around them flourished, Kalen knew one thing for certain: the test had not ended. It had only just begun. Together, they had unlocked something far greater than either of them had imagined. The planet, in its awakening, had not only changed its environment, it had changed them. And now, there was no turning back.